I'm moving now this, my images over so I can see them better. Today we're going to focus on summer flowers, and we're going to start somewhat simply doing the petals of flowers using some of the techniques we saw when we watched a video a couple days ago. So one of the first things that we saw was to just put a puddle of a color in a center. So I'm going to start with, I think I'll start with something that's fairly light. Hopefully you'll still be able to see it, but a yellow that I think is strong enough for you to see. It's probably a Naples yellow. And I'm just going to put a big drop of it in the center here, where I plan to put a flower. So I'm going to put it right here, big blob of it. I have a paper towel handy here. So now I'm going to wipe off my brush. And now with my brush that has a point, I'm going to just drag some of that out. I'm going to do a very fine little line, and then I'm going to push down on my brush and spread it out. And I'm going back again, spread it out. So I have the shape of a petal that I dragged out from the center of that flower. Now I'm going to do the same thing here. Drag it out, spread my brush. I'm thinking I should get a little closer with this so you can see it better. And it's already, you know, it's kind of not a very dark color. So maybe what I'll do is add some yellow ochre to it so you can see it better here. So now I'm going to see what happens now when I put that in where there already was, where it already has a little channel. It's starting to bleed onto the other petals, but that's okay. Now I'm going to do the same here. Make a little narrow area, and then I'm going to make a petal. Pulling out the shape. It's just not enough color in here. Just have to put a really big blob there. So you see how the color is starting to drip down into the wet shape? That's one of the really neat things about doing this, is that it does create a channel and your paint will flow into the wet shapes. I'm going to do one more here. Okay, so now while that's still wet, I'm adding a little bit, another petal here that's kind of going underneath and behind by just putting some paint on my brush and adding another petal. And I'm putting another one here that's not connected. Right here. But because the center of the flower I'm painting is darker, now I'm going to add a darker color, and I'm going to a color that's kind of a Indian red. And something that's more like a burnt sienna. And I'm just going to drop that into this center area. and let it start to flow a little bit into some of the other channels that I had created. Now, while it's wet, I'm going to take a clean brush and just lift a little of the paint from the top because I want to highlight. If I get a little closer. So taking a clean brush, coming back in, wiping my brush on my paper towel and lifting some of the paint. Now I want to smooth some of this out that started to flow in because it's going to dry harder edged than I want. So while with a damp brush, I'm pulling some of this color down into the petal. I'm going to get a little darker. I'm going to mix some purple with that brown that I had, or that dark orange brown that I had. And I'm going to just dab that here in places. Well, it's still damp, sort of a stippling effect. And I see a place I want to be lighter, so I'm lifting a little bit of that, like that. Okay, let's do another one. I don't think the yellow worked too well, so we'll do a sunflower this time. Do something that's got a little bit more color to it. So I'll start with a stronger yellow. And I'm doing the same thing where I'm dropping a big puddle. I want to make sure I've got plenty there.
Sylvia, is that on dry paper?
It's on dry paper, yes. And now I've got the paint off my brush and I'm taking my brush and I'm just going to pull a shape out now for a petal from the puddle I have in the center here.
Is your brush pretty dry, Sylvia?
Yes. It's still the same brush, but I took most of the moisture off of it. And now I'm going to pull it out from there. Another petal shape. Oh, it looks a lot darker on the screen than it does on my paper. But at least you can see it. Okay, so I have some basic petal shapes, but there are a lot more petals than that on a sunflower. So I'm going to start adding a few more here. I've still got paint on my brush. And I'm painting somewhat lightly because I'm going to do some layering. Come back in and do some layers. There's some petals that are behind others. Okay. So I have the basic thing there. Now I'm going to look for an orangey kind of a color, much stronger color because I'm looking at the sunflower that has the brighter color stripes in there. And I'm using, I guess my paint isn't, it's fairly dry because it's not spreading. I'm doing lines here now. And it is filling in some, so that means I have to come back in. There are a couple different ways to do this. One is with a brush. One is to wait a little while and then use something to go back in. Right now it's too wet, but I can use this, the end of my brush that's kind of an angle, or you could use a credit card. I'll just show you what happens if I do it now. Come back in and go like this with this angled thing, and it will draw, it will make a line. Oops, it's not, it's too wet right now. It makes a darker line if it's too wet. See the darker line? That's because I used that card or that edge to do that. Now I'm going to put in a darker center. I need to control it a little bit. See, the center is fairly big on this, so I'm not too worried about how far it goes. But I have to watch it. So with my paper towel, I'll come up and dab before it gets to going too far. And I'm going to sprinkle some salt on it while it's wet.
Sylvia, what does the salt do?
It will hopefully draw up some of the paint to make little white or lighter colored speckles.
Thank you.
Yeah, and if I put a darker tone on it as it dries, there'll be even more contrast. I don't want it to spread out too much, so I'm kind of waiting. To darken that, I use ultramarine blue with the burnt sienna or the reddish color. And while that's waiting for that to dry, I'm going to add a few more petals behind these petals.
What type of brush are you using? I see it's a number 10, but I'm curious about the brand that you use.
It says it's a Simmons. Simply Simmons, it says. Okay, let's paint a different type of flower too. Let's see, what else could we do? All right, how about some of these? I'm not sure if they're zinnias or exactly what they are, but in the bouquet picture, I see some that look sort of like they have a lot of really small petals. So in order to paint those, I'll just use my brush to do some little dabs.
I'm curious how to paint a dahlia.
Oops, you can't see it. Yeah, well, let's try that. Let's try to add one, okay?
All right, thank you, Sylvia.
Sure. Okay, so what I'm looking at here, I can't see it real well, but it looks like there's a yellow center with in the very center of that, more of a reddish color. So I'm going to wait a little while for what I have to dry and let me look for a picture of a dahlia in my pictures here. Okay. So there's that really beautiful dahlia that has the yellow with the pink on the edges. And one of the ways you can work is to just do kind of the under painting of the lighter color. Let's see, it also has white on the edges of the petals. So you have a couple options there. This is actually a case where it might be a good idea to do a little drawing. So let's do a little drawing. We'll put a dahlia right in here. So I'm going to do a drawing that shows some of the structure. And the petals coming out. The center, if you look at what's happening in the center parts of the petals are curving in because they're unfolding. So they're curving in. And that continues into the center with a few rows of that. And then they start to unfold. So as you look at what's happening here, they kind of come out like this. I think I'm doing it a little more quickly than they actually do. They might have another layer here, but for the purposes of doing the demo, we'll do it like this. You see how they alternate between the other petals? Okay, so now I'm going to take my Frisket. I'll show you two ways to do it. One will be with Frisket and one will be with gouache. So I'm taking the lid off my Frisket. I'm hoping that it's not clogged. So. Okay, so I'm dragging this on around the outside edge of these petals. It's on this one side in particular that I'm seeing that it's the white more than the others. The others, I see some on the tips, but not quite as much because it gets darker toward the center. It could be the way the light is hitting it too. Okay, that's good enough. Or maybe just a little in the center. So it'll take just a little bit for it to dry. So while it's drying, let's put a few stems in too, so that we get, let's see, I don't need that now. So that we have some structure. So I'm getting some sap green. Oh, and there are lots of leaves around these sunflowers, so maybe I'll do some shapes of leaves too. So I'm not touching the yellow because I don't want the green to bleed into the yellow, but I'm painting the shapes of some leaves around the outside edge of the sunflower. Just painting the shapes, kind of like we did with the petals, kind of pulling paint out. Let's move my picture so I can see better. Now I'm going to try to do like I said I was going to do with this, which is to scrape back in some lines. checking to see if it's dry. It's not quite dry yet. See if I can use my hair dryer just to help, holding it not too close. Okay, now I want to put the lighter color that of the flower in, which is the yellow. And then some of these kind of a magenta tone. I'll put a little opera in here with some violet that I have. Some of it's bleeding into the yellow, but that's okay. And now I'll take a little more of the opera. And start painting in some of these outer petals. Remember, I put Frisket here, so it's preserving some of the white. And while it's doing that, I'm just going to look at the bouquet that I was starting with and start to work on some building up a few other shapes, and then we'll work on darkening areas and doing some details. So let's look at these orangey flowers over here. Remember that flowers aren't always turned facing you either. Some flowers in a bouquet are going to be away from you. So you're not going to have everything facing you. There are some roses. Let's put in some roses are interesting to paint. And these look like they're blue. Are those roses? Let's make it more of a pinkish color. And some more grasses. Now I'm just going to do some shapes and, try to get some shapes that are a little bit different, not quite the same, to make it a little more interesting, and mix different colors. Like now I'm going to some opera.
This is going to turn out to be a Hallmark card.
Well, not quite. Kind of a long way from that, Martha. But I'm having fun. So I'm going to spray a little now with my sprayer here. Because remember, one of the things you want to do is think about edges and whether you have some soft edges, some hard edges. Allow yourself to be a little bit brave and not everything be defined as something you can recognize. Okay, so I think this is getting dry enough. I can start coming in now and doing a little more detail. This is where I need to get some brushes that are a little bit skinnier and have a better point. So let's see what this is. This is a number 4. Oh no, it says it's a number 6, but it has a good point on it. So this is what I'm going to use. I have to come back in now and start to define some shapes in here. See, I think what's happening here is the whole thing about how to paint a dahlia, but we started off with, we were going to do something really loose. And now if you're going to really paint a dahlia and make it look like a dahlia, you can't really be that loose. You see what I'm saying? 'Cause
Yes, it's more technical.
yeah, it's more of a technical flower and it's more detailed. And so you could probably give the impression of it. But in order to really make it look like that, you have to do some detail. It isn't impossible, it's just that it's not loose anymore. So I'm going to be taking off the frisket to show you then what I have and then how you can pull it all together. Let's see, some of this I want to leave a little more yellow. The principle of layering is that you go in with darker darks as it dries. Now coming over here and adding some center part to this. See if I could start to take this brisket off. Not quite. Okay, I'm going to get some real dark darks going here on this center here.
Sylvia, do you miss your house in Ojai?
Oh, I got a little homesick. Yeah, yesterday I was telling people that I saw a picture of my house, my garden, when I was looking in my photos, and I was feeling homesick. I was kind of surprised, but I definitely was, it's beautiful there. in the spring.
Yeah,
How is it in Santa Barbara right now? Are the flowers all coming out?
It's gorgeous.
Yeah.
It's really windy in Goleta today.
Oh, no kidding? Wow, I wonder. It was just, well, that happens in the springtime, doesn't it?
The wind here in the foothills. Sunny and beautiful.
Oh, wow. There comes a point at which you don't have to keep looking at your reference photos and just start painting. I think it becomes even more fun that way when you just start to feel like, what do you want to put in a different place? So, and kind of let things go, you know? So while I'm waiting for the rest of this to dry, I'm going to do just that. I can find my other image here. It is time for me to start squeezing some fresh paint out into my palette. You ever get to that point where you think you need to start doing that instead of reconstituting things?
We're running out.
Yeah, that too.
Sylvia, you probably didn't mean it, but look to the right. Let's see. Underneath the left sunflower, do you see that figure of the face?
Let's see here. Underneath the left sunflower.
Oh yeah, in pink or lavender.
Right, he's
Oh, I see it. I do see it. Oh, boy. It's smiling.
right.
There is it. Oh, yes.
I love that.
Holding his fingers up to his eye.
Yeah. See, this is what happens when you start to get more abstract.
Really bad though. I can't look at the rest of the picture. I keep seeing that face.
Yeah. As long as I don't start seeing cats, I'm okay. I'm trying to integrate my 2 Saudi Arabian cats with my other kitties, and it's going pretty well. But the blind one, I think because she's blind, she's the one that I have to watch the most because she goes after anything that she's not comfortable with.
Huh.
So it just would make my life easier if I didn't have to keep them in separate rooms.
So how's it going? Are they able to be together?
When I'm in the room, I can monitor them, but I couldn't go away and leave them all out because that would be disastrous.
Hmm.
Yeah. And I don't know if you remember, I was talking about my little old kitty Oberon before, but he, when I took him to the vet after we got here, he had lost a whole pound, but he's now gained half a pound back. So
Good.
he's doing better.
Yeah, cats are sensitive with moves.
Yeah, and I think he got dehydrated and he's used to eating frequently, and I was driving for 4 days, and so he wasn't getting a chance to eat as much or as often.
Mm.
Okay, I can't really, I didn't want to paint a background, but I need to do something to make these yellow flowers stand out more, so.
It's
Any
looking pretty, Sylvia.
Hmm?
That's looking really pretty.
Oh, thanks. But what would you do to make that stand out if you don't want to add a background? Would you put more leaves or something in?
I would put more leaves and a few darker leaves.
Yeah. Start to get some darker darks, huh?
Yes.
Like I tell you, right?
I'm sorry.
That's what I usually tell people to do,
Yes.
darker darks.
But also to make it pop where the leaves are, say for example, where the sunflower leaves are, you could have the edges be darkened. You could go in with a pen.
Oh, you could, huh? You can go in between some leaves or where they go behind the petals and pull out some darks. Let's see, I don't see the many leaves around these cone flowers, but I'm gonna try to put something in there. You can always do like Fabio, huh? And just make it look like there are other flowers in the in the background. I think I have to paint a little bit of a background here.
Yeah, that looks great.
It helps, doesn't it?
Yeah, a lot. And it's better than maybe a background that because that white really pops them all out there.
Uh-huh. And how about a little spatter? That's a big spatter.
Waiting for that.
That means I have to do more up above too, so. Okay, I want to rub the frisket off. I'm gonna get the thing to rub it with so that I don't spread it around with my fingers. Okay. So now that we've got the frisket off, let me go back and look at that photo. All right, now that we've got the frisket off, we can actually see we've got some nice whites that are left. So this is where you go and you try to define a few specific shapes. Like in between, you know. I think there's still some on there. And then you come in with some gouache too, so we'll do a little of that too. Right in the center, there's a green area right here in the center. Coming back in with some gouache now.
Could also, to make this highlights, could you wait till it dried and use a little razor blade?
You could do that, yeah. Sometimes it's harder with a razor blade to do certain types of shapes, you know. So you have a little bit more control with a brush, I think. But sure, you could do that. Well, I could noodle on this, but I don't really want to noodle a lot more. I want to try to do something with the overall shape and the overall composition. So just going to put a few darks in there. Okay. Getting a little better view of some of these flowers. I'm going to be anxious to see what you guys are doing because I'm sure, you know, we're all doing something a little different. And so it'll be nice to see how it's coming out. So for now, I'm just coming back in. I'm trying to look for places where I want some darker darks in the composition, not necessarily, you know, looking at the reference photo or anything, just looking at where I think I'd like to see some darks. Okay, the dahlia really doesn't stand out at all, so I'm gonna do something about some of the colors around it to help make it stand out. Okay. Does anybody have one that they'd like to share with us? We still have like another, at least half an hour.
I can share mine. This is Linda. I've been playing along with you.
Okay,
Here, I'll just hold it up.
yeah, let me stop the video for a little bit here.
It's not as far along as yours, but
Just a second, Linda, I'm gonna
sure.
stop
course.
the recording for a second.
Used for the
Yes, I used
Okay.
white gouache, and so I also sprinkled some salt. I don't know if you can see now what's happening in some of these areas with the salt. So it's getting a little bit more,
texture to it.
yeah, so what I'd kind of like to do is, you see how, I loved what Gina did with hers, where it was soft down here, and see, I have some of that over in here. I think I need to have some in a few other areas. I don't want to make it the same everywhere, but I do think that having softer edges in places really helps. So I'm going to add just a little more softness in the background. And then I'll probably, well, maybe I'll do like Fabio, you know how I think I'll spread a little on one side here. So if you have some dry and some wet, and then you drop color into it, then you get some neat effects too. Because the paint goes into the wet shapes. And it's a way to keep from being too controlled, you know? Maybe a little green in places too. A little more salt, and then I don't think I'm gonna do a lot more to mine. I'm feeling like, you know, it was kind of an experiment and it was fun. And now if I do anything else, it would be to come back in with some white to maybe help with the shape on my dahlia. It's got lost some of the shape.
So I think it's beautiful. I also like how you added those like the water soft, the splotches of water on the sides all around it.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful. I think it's perfect. It looks so pretty. Like that could be on a napkin or a handkerchief.
And if you tilt it, you see how some of this wetness will kind of go spread down?
Yes, that's what I really like, how you added that softness all around it.
Mhm. I think it needed it. So
Did you wet that? Did you wet that with the brush or was that spray you put on?
I
And
sprayed,
then
I
you
sprayed,
sprayed it.
and then I don't think I sprayed down here. I think that part might have been with a brush.
Okay.
But now I'm going to do a little more on my dahlia.
Sylvia, what about with the salt? Do we just wait for it to dry and then brush it off?
Yes, I've never really worried too much about it. I don't know if that's a mistake or not, you know. Maybe I should be more concerned about it, but I've always felt like I brush it off and then I don't think about it anymore. So I'm going to put a few little dots here of gouache on here to bring some of that out. And now I'm going to see if I can find the dahlia again. I keep losing it in all these images. And so now I'm just looking to see where I lost my definition, and it's on some of these petals. And the gouache right from the tube will be a lot more opaque. So if you're reconstituting it, it won't be quite as white as if you just dab right in the tube. Just then you might have to add a little water. And you can add gouache to some of your paint too. Like since I don't like that my sunflower got pretty, or that my coneflower got covered up. So now I added a little gouache to my yellow. And I can go in and I can clean up a shape, you know. And I can actually correct things that I think. You don't want to do too much of that because then it'll start to look like you're noodling, but for little edges, you can do that. You know, places where you think, oh, maybe a little, whoops, I didn't mean to do that. Little highlight might be good. Some of these flowers.
What do you mean by noodling?
Oh, I mean, where you start to go in and look at all these little details and start to, you don't want to make everything precise, yeah, just because the whole idea was spontaneity and looseness.
Oh,
But in some places, you can do that. Like I wanted to define the shapes of some of these petals a little better.
Another word for it is overworking.
Yeah, right. It's very humid here today. It's like 87% humidity, I think. So things don't want to dry. So this looks too dark. See if I can scratch back in some of those areas. Yeah. When you have places that are wet and you want to break up a shape, you can do the scraping with the brush like this. The end of a brush or a credit card. Okay, I'm going to stop painting now. I'll stop the video.